Speaker, since June of 1970, there has been debate in this chamber over whether or not it has been an American practice to bomb and destroy the villages of Laos. Additional evidence on this subject was presented in an eyewitness account by John Everingham in this month's issue of the Washington Monthly. The article follows. March 1969. It was a 3-day-long walk to Lombu village. When I first arrived, I saw a cluster of thatched bamboo houses, the cries of small children, the grunts and squeals of fat pigs in the underbrush. I was shown to the house of the district chief. He was a short, vigorous man in his late 50s, with a high forehead and a melancholy dignity of a senior statesman. His name was Nyesu Yang. According to Nyesu Yang, the first helicopter landed in Lombu in 1960. The pilots were American, but a Hmong officer stepped out to speak to them. The officer spoke of an alliance between the Americans and a Hmong colonel of the Royal Law Army named General Ming Pao. He said that American officials had made a pact with Ming Pao, promising the Hmong their own army and independent state in the mountains of Laos. The officer painted a future of prosperity for the Hmong. All they had to do was become anti-communist and help the Americans fight the Pathet Lao that were occupying the northern territories of Laos. One of the problems that the people of Lombu had in accepting this deal was they did not know who Ming Pao was. But there was a more basic problem. Nyesu Yang did not inform me until some time later. He said, if we joined the alliance, the Pathet Lao would have become our enemy, and they would have threatened our village. I told the officer that we would not join the alliance. The officer then became angry and threatened. The Americans and Ming Pao considered those who were not friends to be enemies, and enemy villages will be attacked and captured by Ming Pao. October 1970. A companion and myself traveled to Lombu village. As we arrived, 20 teenage boys in U.S. military uniforms, dragging M1 carbines and rifles that were often too big for them. They paced themselves through a mock military maneuver and oftentimes would drive to the ground in a half-hearted manner that would have gotten them killed if bullets were really flying through. This afternoon, another helicopter will come to pick up these 20 teenage boys, where the Pathet Lao were in the midst of fighting. They will be taken to Moisor. As we all waited, the bombs could be heard peppering through the hills towards Moisor. The bomb's blast shook the hills under our feet and shook off every last nerve of these young soldiers. Several mothers were crying as they tied Lucky Charms onto their boys. And in the center of the gathering, District Chief Nyesu Yang was handing out military uniforms and pep-talking his new recruits. However, his voice was flecked with anger and did nothing to ease the funeral-like atmosphere. Early the next morning, I ran out from breakfast in Nyesu Yang's house as a helicopter finally landed. Air America was clearly printed down the side of the silver and blue craft. The helicopter rose, and in 1, 2, 3 swift trips, 20 village boys were gone. None would ever return home again, except for one. His body was returned 12 months later for burial. August 1971. The Pathet Lao had the CIA army against the wall. District Chief Nyesu Yang had regularly traveled to Longking for conferences with both Americans and Hmong officers. He had seen the war approach until its shadow hung over his own village. He was desperate. Soldiers were dying. faster than they could be trained. Demands from Longking became more persistent and more threatening. Longpu must send more men. Of the 60 that I had said last year, 12 were dead by the end of the year. Last year, they only wanted the 15-year-olds. Now, they're asking for the 14-year-olds. I only have 60 men left in this village, and I need them here. I will not send any more. Longking radioed and threatened. No men, no rights. The families with men already sent to the army were dependent on the continuation of the American rice drops. But Yesu Ying refused again. The last rice drop was in February. In March, the Patel Lao had entered the northern part of the district. Villagers fled to the forest to avoid the bombing, and in hiding, they became more desperate for rice. But continued radio calls to Longking received the same response. No men, no rice. May 1972. Nobody lives there, said the Royal Lao officer, as I looked eastward from Route 13 to Lopbu. They found it queer that I would even ask about Lopbu. They did not know which tracks were mine, and they were not confident leading me through. Their attitude did not help my sense of purpose, but still, I had to get there. Shortly after, I had encountered an officer named Kam Singh, who had recently returned from Longpu. He said that Longpu was now under the Patel Lao control, but that village had been burned and bombed to black stumps and scorched earth. The representative from California, Paul McCluskey Jr., would press Evernham's journal to the United States Congress floor on October 17, 1972. However, it wouldn't be until nearly 50 years later that Yesu Ying's granddaughter would unexpectedly discover this article. Hello, I'm Stephanie, and I am Yesu Ying's granddaughter. I would have never explored or discovered these articles in the United States Archives if it wasn't for the 3 lessons that I have experienced and learned from the historical statecraft of home history. So, my question for the audience is, what is Hmong history? What does Hmong history feel like for you? What are places, people, or curious thoughts that you may have? You can feel free to raise your hand, otherwise, just shout out the answers. I'd love to hear from you all. What was that? Thank you. She shared that Hmong history makes her sad, but she's proud of the resiliency in Hmong culture. Who else? Yes, feel free to share. Oh, we are bringing around a mic. Thank you, Kira.
The Mekong River comes up to mind. It's a river that was often crossed to get to safety, and a lot of lives were lost there, and that was kind of like their last hope. Yeah, that was like the location that came up to mind.
Yeah, Mekong River. Thank you for sharing. Who else? I see a hand over here.
So for me, feelings that comes to mind whenever I think of Hmong history is, first of all, anger, hatred for what happened to our people and what happened during the war, before the war, and after the war. So a lot of hatred there, but mostly the whys. I feel like I'm always chasing the whys. Why did it happen? Why us? Why? Just so many whys. But I do feel proud for Hmong history though. We're so resilient. We've literally came from nothing, and yeah, here we are. We have doctorates, we have scholars, we have entrepreneurs, and so it first starts with anger, but it ends in pride.
I love that. Thank you so much, Lee. Who else? I see a couple hands over here. I see a couple of hands over here. Sorry, Kara, I'm making you work for free.
For feelings, I'm kind of curious to see, or curious about if none of, if most of the things in Hmong history that have already happened, what, where, and what would be, like, if, what and how we would be.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing that if Hmong history didn't happen the way it happened, where would the Hmong people be? I think I saw another hand at the back, and then we'll let that person close us off. All right. Yeah, so I had very similar experiences with the rest of you. So these very similar experiences come from my first lesson of Hmong history. My first lesson was from the American public school system. During my K-12 education, I was taught that the CIA, in an alliance with the Hmong people, and through the help of General Powell and the willingness of Hmong people, Hmong guerrilla troops were formed, and when they were formed, they helped the Americans navigate through Southeast Asia, and the Americans promised that they would support the Hmong people in full capacity. However, Hmong families were abandoned, they fended for themselves, and had to seek political asylum in Thailand, and where they hoped for sponsorships to France, Australia, and the United States of America. And then there were informal teachers like my dad. Therefore, growing up, my dad was very vocal about what Hmong political identity should look like and feel like. To him, the Hmong identity in global politics should feel like anti-communism, and it should look like commemoration for all victims who have suffered from the communist regime. But when he shared his stories, I felt the cries of a young soldier. He was praying to his ancestors for protection. It looked like a young man losing his children to war. It was a man who helped his family survive over decades and many sick infested in Thai refugee camps. He looked like a young man abandoned by the strongest government in the world. My first lesson of Hmong history aligned with the popular memory of the Secret War. The popular memory, a story that briefly explains how great of an ally Hmong people were because of their willingness to help the American troops during the Vietnam War. In my second lesson, I realized that it was more than just the content that they taught me. It was most importantly about who taught me and how much they wanted to teach me. One night, while I was in high school, my mom started storytelling. She shared about how she was the eldest daughter to a Tassim, an appointed district chief of the royal law government, and how she had to cook large quantities of rice in these mega-sized rice steamers for the visiting Chinese and French merchants. Then she mentioned that General Powell had also visited. So out of curiosity, and then also because I was hearing for the first time a historical figure being in our family history, I was very intrigued. I asked, "What was General Powell doing in your home?" She responded, "He was there to ask for an alliance from our Yutzi." "Oh, so did my Yutzi say yes, and how did he feel?" "No, but they would have killed him if he didn't." This night of storytelling changed the trajectory of my life and my role in Hmong history forever. It was the first time I heard of Hmong history that did not align with a popular memory. A popular memory, as described by historian Paul Cohn, is when people experience a traumatic event such as war or the threat of annihilation. They often turn to history for stories to promise a positive outcome to their suffering. In my second lesson, I started exploring this popular memory, the popular retelling of stories that are used to comfort the modern-day feelings and provide political closure to the legacy of the patriarchy and the United States CIA. But then I noticed that there was more. I noticed how these victims of these large-scale traumatic events usually do not add on to the popular memories. They don't challenge the popular memories due to historical trauma and social mimicry, which is the act of copying a dominant culture in order to feel secure. By the time I started implementing my own thoughts and opinions into the discourse of Hmong history, the popular memory was already mass collected. Political actors and emerging powers have already mobilized and used selective memories to deliberately re-narrate and appropriate a past. When a popular memory is used to fuel political agendas, it is what peace scholar Maximilian Magner calls historical statecraft. Statecraft, a dominant group or person who re-narrates and appropriates of history by using selective memory to build their own prestige. In 2007, the Madison School Board in Wisconsin made a unanimous vote to name a new elementary school after Ming Pao to commemorate his legacy. Historian scholar Alfred McCoy shared, one would think before naming a school after someone that they would have checked the available resources to make sure it's appropriate. Anthropologist scholar Dr. Gary Yale sent a letter to the local newspaper in Madison, Wisconsin, sharing his arguments of McCoy writing generalized accusations in his 1972 books, The Politics of Heroin. Alfred McCoy was a companion of John Everingham, who trekked into Longbu in 1971. When he visited Longbu, my Yitzi was basically like, okay, Everingham, why are you bringing another white guy here? Just kidding. Because Everingham was already very familiar with my Yitzi and the interpreter, he frankly tells them that McCoy is there to talk and do research about the opium trade in Southeast Asia. McCoy shares in his book, for a man who did not read a daily newspaper, Yitzi Ying promised a bargain that showed me a keen sense of media management. He would provide armed men to escort us anywhere in his district and would allow us to ask for anything we wanted about opium. And if he did that, could McCoy get an article in a Washington newspaper reporting that the CIA had broken its promise? Dr. Lee describes Yitzi Ying as a loud military leader who resented Ming Pao for his military success and close association to Americans, and said, these Lao would not hesitate to describe Ming Pao in the most unflattering terms, in which Dr. Lee added that McCoy used secondhand and sources that were based on suspicion. Although McCoy was in Longbu to report about the drug trade in Southeast Asia, he became immersed in the political and historical shaping of a stateless group of people. McCoy uncovered a narrative that was seen as competing with a popular memory, and therefore a threat to the legacy of groups of people. What historical statecraft does is the elites would have the power to destabilize a society. It would generate defiant historical frameworks, making it so hard to find our references and so difficult to research our own history. It will make history so ambiguous and difficult to trace back into. Historical statecraft is an active form of generational trauma, a disruption, and attachment, when people can't relate to their own land, culture, and ways of life. Which brings me to my third lesson of Hmong history. a call to action. When you are disrupted from your own history and ancestral roots, you can't see it, you can't talk about it, you can't understand it, and when you can't understand it, you don't know the role you play and how it plays in you. In 1970, President Nixon would reveal that American planes were bombing Laos, but emphasized that the bombing was directed to the Ho Chi Minh trails and away from most civilians. He claimed that most civilians fled due to the Pathet. However, in 1971, Representative McCluskey visited Laos and discovered a secret report on the causes of civilian fleeing the villages. It was a report commissioned by the U.S. Embassy, and it consisted of over 200 refugees from 96 villages. The report concluded that 76% of these interviews gave U.S. bombing as the most compelling reason for abandoning their home. After Abraham's last account, we left off with an abandoned Lopu, bombed to black stubs and scorched earth. When I found the article, I was already a junior in college, and I wondered, what happened to my Yitzi and Lopu? This is where my call to action came to play. During my first semester of college at this very university, I had a 100-level world history class. My greatest mentor, Dr. Valerie Barstay, said, "You are more than just consumers of your history, but you can be producers as well." So through my own oral history interviews and research, I will add to Abraham's last account. May 1972. They kept insisting for my grandfather to stay and join the Gyeofa forces, in which he responded, "你的寂寞的寂寞，他们碰见要手中，了我碰我们子我要红，也不得亲的就没干啊。" There were mixed emotions and debates among the men in the family on what the next plan was. Another district chief had traveled to see my grandfather and asked why he was going to flee Laos. "Yes, sir. Ogami yokia. Kuyamote mute lukena chopachigata. Nyo Ogyofa la Chisao. Nyo Tonyala la Chisato. Oligala Ituning Adonda Benin Chiti Zakito." After back and forth debate and having a fear of the unknown, my grandfather was convinced by the passing from another district that joining the Gyeofa or the Hmong freedom fighter movement in the jungles was the best way to survive. Either way, he was going to accept being a buffer for the United States anymore. So he embarks the rest of his journey by saying, "Children, now is the time to go leave your wives and families with us. Get ready." So we got ready. And my call to action was to allow for multiple truths to coexist and to preserve historical narratives that go beyond the popular memory. In the attempt to save the popular memory, a Hmong scholar distanced my grandfather from his Hmong ethnicity and ancestral roots by referring to him as a Lao military leader. In an attempt to save the popular memory, the CIA roughly interrogated my grandfather to retract his statement shared with John Abraham and Alfred McCoy. In an attempt to save the popular memory, my elders diluted their own historical narratives to become more digestible for the American public. Historical surgery, which is the field to propaganda and elucidates the work of the historical narratives that we so deserve. In Seeds of Trauma, Dr. Akyung argues that it can cause social forgetting and public silence on certain narratives and memories that don't meet social norms. But while in states of healing or psychological flexibility, it will reveal how some commemorative practices are not everlasting. My family wouldn't discover these historical archives until 50 years later because my mother and her siblings were pushed into collective silence. Sociologist Bernard Geisen argues that by encapsulating in eloquent silence, it would only generate traumatic shock and shame, making it convenient for perpetuators to claim victimhood. By challenging the popular memory, it does not mean that we are removing the popular narrative, but it means that there are popular memory and more. So we must do more. We must do more than just look at the bigger picture, but we must paint the bigger picture. We must ask for the paintbrush from our elders. We must ask to share the paintbrushes. We must wash and take care of these paintbrushes. The picture that we paint for the next generation will show how the Hmong people have remained preserved and are resilient. The people whose histories were once uprooted in forms of genocide, war, and refuge. It means we are ready to be in states of healing. It means that Hmong people love themselves and each other enough to honor the historical truths that we deserve. Ku thao cho tadi sada kita ko mana dia theo ku thao cho lo lu ko hong hasia ko ni chin cho ku mana ku chưa hay lu mi kan ba sư chỉ thao nên sa sa đi cha cái gì mà ku bé mình chỉ sa ku đây cái chớp phơ là cũng không kích cử chỉ ku đây cái chớp phơ là mi kan ba sư chỉ ku chỉ tao mo là xài là mong rau đâu ni sợ đấy thao cái nên sa sa đi cha chỉ thao nên tới ku bỏ theo một chút từ bao tao chắc khác thế nhưng mà cũng không biết cái sự gì một trong những cái chuyện tôi mong cũng mà nó nhưng mà chỉ là một thằng cái này là nó cũng chơi được mong gì cái chuyện mà hay là chứng minh đi thôi vậy. Okay, I believe that there is a Q&A session. So if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Yes, please. How did I find the archives and resources? Yeah, so like I said, being a poor, refugee, family, we didn't have the knowledge or resources to do our own archival research or going to these, library, archives. So really coming to UWSP and doing my own research and having access to resources like JSTOR or the United States Public Library, I was able to find this resource. So yeah, I found it actually in 2020. It was right when we were quarantining, and I had joined a Facebook group called Old Hmong Pictures, and somebody had posted a picture of my deceased family, and he said, "Oh, this is my famous grandpa." And I'm like, "Who the heck are you? You're not my cousin." But then eventually I found out that we were distant cousins. So as you know, Hmong people are, our cousins are just cousins. But yeah, that was how I found it. Really just being in higher ed and having the resources to navigate that. So I'm very privileged to be able to find these resources. Are there any other questions? I see an arm in the back, but I think if Kira's bringing over a mic, I don't want you to have to shout.
Can you reiterate again, what are the consequences of popular memory and the historical statecraft of Hmong people?
Yeah, so the consequences of popular memory. Popular memory oftentimes push our Hmong elders into shame. How many of you have asked your Hmong elders to explain their history and they were more like hush-hush? So because of the trauma that comes from Hmong history and sharing the popular memory of what the Americans did, they often, fear that by sharing these memories, it would threaten their well-being in the United States, which brings us to historical statecraft. It allows for perpetuators to make historical surgeries on our own historical memories and narratives. which is why it is so important for you to start asking your elders today about their own Hmong history. Were there any other questions?
What has been the response to uncovering
Yeah, so the question was, what has been the response of uncovering these historical memories of a popular leader like General Mao? So my uncles and my mom, they were very hesitant to share these historical memories with me because of the shame and guilt that they felt in which, folks have put them through, or folks in power have put them through. So when I interviewed my uncle, he was very hesitant to share with me because of the way in which people have created this narrative that my Yinzi was very anti-General Pao, right? And he has shared this once, or anti-General Pao, and then also very pro-Pathet Lao, or very pro-Lao communist regimes. And he has shared that they live among the Lao folks and Lao ethnic groups for so long, for centuries, that they all got along with each other. So my Yinzi had a great relationship with the Lao communities who then, became communist. But then also, he wasn't against Pao either. He just wanted his folks to survive. Were there any other questions? Oh, I see one.
So, when you have found out through research that your grandfather was a military leader and he has the anti-Vang Pao experience, I see that your dad was also in the war. Have you spoken to him about his experience? Was he also anti-Vang Pao?
No, my dad, growing up, my dad, like I said, has been very vocal about being pro-Vang Pao, and then obviously he also recognizes that, through war and through these things, as mentioned earlier by one of the questions, the true power lies between the U.S. empire. So there's just that nuanced understanding that, both can coexist at the same time. Being a supporter of General Pao and then also understanding the hurt in which the Americans had put us through and not funneling that through General Pao only. Okay, were there any other questions? Who else? Okay. So I'd like to invite our MCs up here. So in movement work, there is a popular chant in which the Black Lives Matter movement and other Black and brown movements that do. So I'm going to invite everybody to stand if you can and interlock your arms with the focus. Now this is to help us remain preserved and remember how resilient we are. So I'm going to say the chant and you'll repeat. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win. We must love each other. We must love each other. And support each other. And support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Okay, I want us to be a bit louder. I want the entire university to hear us, okay? Okay.